friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to talk about some of my favorite appliances and why they are my favorites, and also why I won't invest in certain other newfangled things that always seem to be coming out. Even though some of the things I'll be talking about, I am really glad that I have them. Being my favorite doesn't necessarily mean it's something I use often, but I'm going to cover that. So let me start off with the reason why you won't see me investing in things like, and please don't get offended if you bought one of these and you love it and you're using it all the time. But I have my reasons why for many years I never just bought whatever the latest cool gadget was when it came to kitchen stuff. Though a lot of times I see things and go, oh, that's really neat, but I just wouldn't do it. Like, bread machines years ago were the big thing. Everybody was wanting a bread machine, but it wasn't all that long after, well, all of a sudden every garage sale you went to was another bread machine. And I never bought into that because I'm like, why do I need a bread machine when I've been making bread by hand since my early teens? I don't need a bread machine. It's just another appliance to take up space and to have to wash. And so it wasn't of interest to me. And actually, that's pretty much the way I felt about any other appliance, be it an Instapot, an air fryer, or anything else, unless it was something I knew I was going to use on a regular basis. So to me, I wanted a dehydrator for many years, when back in, I don't even know what year it was. It was at least 20 years ago that I got my first dehydrator, because it was in an auction and it was brand new, and I was able to get it for only $30. Plus, so not only was I helping a good cause, I was also getting this great dehydrator, which was called, I think, Open Country, but made and owned by the same company that makes the Nesco dehydrator. It's virtually the same exact dehydrator. And I started learning how to dehydrate food on my own, just trying different things. And though I really liked it, I didn't do it a lot until I started getting more serious about food storage and growing a garden. So then I ended up buying a backup dehydrator so I could not only have more trays, instead of just the 4, I could have a backup. And I was really glad that I did it. It was worth the expense. And I think I paid $50, $60 for that Nesco dehydrator. Doubled my trays and then had my backup, so that when that motor from that first one I bought finally died, I would have a backup. And that's what happened. I think it held in there for close to 18 years before it finally just gave up the ghost. But in that time, I also found 2 more dehydrators, Nescos, for $3 and $5 a piece. Both of them had been barely used. And though I love those, and I still will pull I think I only have 1 left now, because one by one the motor started dying on them. But I do have 1 left that still works. And so in the summertime, when we're getting plenty of solar power, I like to depend on that, and I use it outside. Well, I have since also invested in, after kind of looking into it and talking to someone who's not only had an Nesco, but also had an Excalibur, but then decided to get the Cosori, and she decided she liked that best out of all of them. And I have to admit, I love the Cosori. Though there's things about the Nesco I really prefer. There's some cases I really like having those stackable trays where I can arrange things according to the things that need more time and more heat to dry on the top, and the things that need less time and less heat at the bottom. That is nice, so I can dehydrate various different things at the same time. I do like my Cosori, generally speaking, better, because I have 2 of them now set up. I ended up getting a second Cosori, and I have a video on that, but I can show you some images here where I stack them on top of each other, and that way when I've got a lot coming in, this was really nice last summer, and I can run my Nesco, and I can run that, and I can still run it on the solar power by using an extension cord. So as far as electric appliances go, I'm really glad that I have those things, and I use them quite frequently. Now, another appliance I use a lot is just my Oster. I bought this one more recently, like a couple of years ago when we were redoing the kitchen, because I saw this color and fell in love with it. Even though my old Oster was still running great, I saved that one. I didn't get rid of it. I didn't sell it in a garage sale. I have it boxed up and saved. That one now is my backup blender if anything ever goes crazy with this one, because I believe in having backups. And for what it costs to get a big fancy $400 blender, I can have a whole slew of blenders as backups. And so that's why having a couple of these on hand is worth it to me, because the Oster brand has always been a hearty, good blender for me, always. The very first one we had, I think we paid $15 for, and it lasted a good 15 years or so until we finally did have to replace it. And at that point, I bought a couple. So I think I actually have two backups to this red one. Now, this one was the most expensive because it's the newest, and prices have gone up a lot since. But the previous two that I bought, I think I paid $20 a piece for those. I bought one, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go buy another one. Two other electric items, not counting your refrigerator, your range, your full-size range, and some of those. I'm talking about your smaller items. I use quite often is our toaster oven. And I got this beautiful red toaster oven. I'll put you a picture here. I love the retro look of it, and adding the red to add a little more color to my kitchen has just been really nice. But I love having a toaster oven. The toaster oven I use far more than I ever use my range, because it's just the two of us, or even if there's more than that, I can cook and bake all kinds of things in my toaster oven, and it's going to use less electricity. And this time of the year, it gets run on my solar power, or because we have good solar power coming in at this time, and good battery collection and reserve, so I can run my toaster oven on that as long as I'm doing it during the day while we have, not late at night or something like that, and then draining our batteries overnight. But the same thing with the dehydrators. One of the reasons I prefer dehydrating over freeze drying is that if I'm running on solar power, a freeze dryer, you cannot stop the process once you've started it. You would have to start all over again if I understand correctly. But a dehydrator, you can just unplug it or turn it off and then turn it back on. So if I'm running those things on solar power, I can turn them off and then start them again once the sun is hitting our solar panels, and I don't have to worry about it draining my batteries through the night. Most cases, that's not going to be a problem. I could run it all night, especially now that we have a better battery bank, but I just don't like to take that chance. I just prefer to do all my dehydrating during the day. But, same thing goes with any electric appliance that I'm using the solar power for. And so the toaster oven's been a really great thing. And even if I have to use public power, like in the middle of winter, the toaster oven is going to use far less energy to run, especially if I'm just making a single pie, some dinner rolls or whatever, and I got plenty of room in there. It is something that's just going to take up a tiny little bit of space in my range. It just doesn't make sense to use this when I can use my toaster oven and save a little bit of money. But the range does get used for really big items like turkeys, or if I'm doing things like cookies on a sheet. And then the other appliances I'm really glad that I have for cooking would be my rocket stove, which I am going to be pulling that out here soon and starting to use it again. It's been a couple of years since I've used it, but it is fun to cook on in the summertime where I can have something going outside. Too hot to have things running inside. Oh, and I also have a solar oven that I've had for I think maybe 12 years. I got the Solar Vorb long before I ever even heard of the All-American solar oven, and it's been good. I heard the All-American holds heat better, but it's worked good enough for me, the one that I have. They don't even think they make them anymore, but I do use that as we start getting more and more sun. That does get pulled out and used, and especially for things like roasts, whole chickens, and soups, chilies, things like that is where I use it the most. But then through a good part of the year, almost most of the year, we have fires going in the wood stove, and that's what I do most of my cooking and a lot of my baking on. Not all of my baking. A lot of my things just do best in an oven, but I do have a stovetop oven that is really cool to have. I haven't used it a lot, but I'm really glad that I have it. It's definitely something I will fall back on in the case of middle of winter, we're not getting enough solar power, we have a power outage, which happens all the time in the winter, then I can use that. Or I can also use our other backup oven, which is a camp oven, and it's the Camp Chef. And I got the red, of course, because I really like red and green. Those are a couple of my favorite colors. And I keep that in the other room, actually right next to our sliding glass door. So if I have to run it because it is gas, I just open that door so there's plenty of ventilation. But I have a video on it that I did where I think I was baking bread in it and just kind of getting familiar with how to use it, because I do recommend anytime you invest in something that you're getting for the purpose of having it as an emergency backup, that you practice using it instead of having to learn how to do it when the power's out, when things are already really frustrating. So now a couple other things that I want to mention that I have sitting here. Now this I haven't used in a very long time, but when my dad first gave it to me, this is vintage, I believe it's mid 1940s coffee grinder, and I used this a lot when we first got it, and I was constantly every day grinding my coffee in it. And now it's more of a decorative piece. I found it at a garage sale for a few dollars. A bigger one, it's got a bigger hopper than this because the hopper's pretty small. That is also a hand crank grinder. And though I haven't used that one a long time either, I did use it for a while. In fact, it's permanently mounted to the same table that we have my Country Living grain mill permanently mounted to. And for a while we used to have those in here, and I would actually grind coffee with one hand and grind my grains with the other. Now I use my blender to grind my coffee so I can do a lot more at a time and just fill up a jar and then work through that jar, just a quart jar, and then I'll do that again when needed. So, that's just easier. However, even though I'm not using these coffee grinders anymore, I'm still glad I have them, and I'm glad I have both, because I can dedicate one of them, like maybe this one, to food items and then use the other one for coffee. Plus I like having vintage pieces. I'm just, if you haven't seen my video, I did recently a video on some of my favorite antique and vintage pieces, and I'll link to that down below. So anything that I can run without electricity is an important thing to have on hand, even if it's not something I use often. I like having that. They're still some of my favorite pieces because I know they're there in the event that I need them, because there's no power of any kind to run any of my electric appliances. So remember, we live in rain country, so midwinter, we already have really short days, and we have almost constant cloud cover in the winter, which means very little solar collection. So we don't like to put a whole lot of dependence. There's things that we can run if we absolutely have to, like the fridge and the freezers, and usually can get by with those just fine during a power outage, and we'll switch everything over to solar so we conserve our solar power battery our collection for those times to run those things, so we don't have to pull out the gas generator. But we have that too if we need it. Oh, I mentioned my Country Living grain mill. Main reason I did that was one of the few things I was willing to pay that kind of money for, because of the fact that it is hand crank. And for the first year or so that I had it, I was always constantly grinding the grains by hand. It is a long process. It can take 15 minutes to a half an hour, depending on the grain, to get a cup of flour. So it's a lot of work. So Patrick did build me a motor to save time as life started getting busier. And it's been really nice because I can just plug it in. It only takes me a few minutes to get a cup of flour using that motor, and he did do a video on that as well. I can run that on solar power, I can run it on public power, and I can run it just by hand power. So another thing that I bought and I've used several times, I have a video that I did several years ago after I found this at a garage sale for $3. It was brand new, still in the box, but you can tell it was this particular one was probably made in the 70s. You can tell by not only the color, but the type of handle that's on here. But this is an Atlas laminator and then pasta cutter. So you got your laminator here, which is where you can keep rolling your pasta through there to get it nice and thin. And then you put it through your cutters. This would be like for fettuccine. This would be for spaghetti noodles. And I have used this and quite a few times. And I love having this, even though I don't depend on this. I do love having this, and it's hand crank. I don't need electricity to run it. So that is one of the reasons why you won't see me investing in a lot of new items like air fryers and whatnot, because that's just more electricity dependency. So I do have my things that run off electricity that I love, but I also have backups to anything where if I don't have power, I don't have to worry about that. Now, it's funny because I used to use a slow cooker for several years until it just up and died on me. And I didn't buy one for years because by this point I'd started using my wood stove for cooking things that I would want to slow cook. Because you can slow cook in your solar oven in the summertime and on your wood stove in the wintertime. I do a lot of slow cooking on there. It's great. I love my wood stove for that. But I thought, you know what, maybe I'll go ahead and buy myself a new slow cooker, in a red, of course, to have it on hand to use in the summertime when I don't have a fire going and I want to slow cook something. But I've only used it maybe once. I always forget that I have it. So it's just something taking up space. And because I'm more apt to just pull out the solar oven and set that up and use it instead of putting wear and tear on electrical appliances, because that's the other thing. If I have something that's not electric and doesn't have a lot of parts that can wear out, I'm going to go for that first so that I'm putting the least amount of wear and tear on those items, and so they're there when I really need them. And where a solar oven, you can even build your own. There's really not much for moving parts you have to worry about wearing out. There's no electronics that are going to break down, and you can build your own with a couple of boxes and some newspaper and a piece of glass or plexiglass. So I did a video, by the way, on solar ovens, and even have in that video in the description box linked to a place where it shows you how to build your own out of things that you might have laying around. And then as far as backups for dehydrating, well, a lot of people who live in drier climates that don't have a lot of humidity or a lot of rain, you can just hang a lot of your stuff or lay them out on trays. And yes, I have a video on options for dehydrating that don't have to cost any money or even any electricity. I'll link to that down below as well. But I have the rack. It's actually 2 racks that I stack on top of each other that Patrick built for me to use with my wood stove. And so I'll link to the video he did showing how he built it. It's quite a few years old, but if I really need to, something I want to dry faster, things like meat and things that can handle higher heats, I can set it on top of my wood stove. In that case, I'll only put one because only one's going to work there. And that's where I'd make my jerky and so on. That's why I typically would only make jerky in the wintertime, so I can use my wood stove for that. And then more delicate things get dried on the racks right next to the wood stove. So right now I have some nettle. It's actually, I think, dry. I need to go get it and then powder it up so I can throw it into the chicken's feed. But because that's why I've got it in there. But I use nettle a lot in our own food, dried nettle. I add it into all kinds of stuff. But I've dried many things in there, all kinds of herbs, cheese, and so much more using those. So I do have backups to my electric dehydrators. And that's the thing, is anytime I think about something that I'm dependent on electric wise, we have backups to. The only thing I wouldn't say we specifically have backups to would be the freezer and the fridge. But we have ways we can deal with that and make it work. So we have gas generators and we have the solar power. But if I had to start pulling stuff out and canning it, which yes, I do all my canning on a propane stove out on the deck in the summertime. So I do most of my canning through spring, early fall. So I can do that outside, and that works really good for me. And if I had to just start pulling a bunch of stuff out of the freezer and canning it up and dehydrating it up, I'd do that. And I'm not going to worry about that. I don't worry about that so much, but those are the things, the fridge and the freezers, that I want to be able to conserve any of our other types of power sources, such as the gas generator, the diesel generator, or the solar power for. And so I try to use as many other things, especially when solar power collection is low and we don't know if we're going to have yet another power outage, because though they happen mostly in the winter, they can happen any time of the year around here, and they do. We have quite a number of them every year. It's just the way it is when you live where we live. And so that's why I talk about these things, and it's not to put anyone down for their choices. It's that if you love your air fryer, you love your Instapot, your blender, your whatever it is that you have, if you're trying to be more prepared, you do want to make sure you look into having things on hand as a backup source. So like for my blender, one of the things I have a backup for is just a $20 hand crank basically a food processor. And I've used it quite a bit, but now I just save that for when I absolutely need it. And something like that can be really, really handy when you need it. And it doesn't even have to cost a lot of money. While, and another example would be a mixer. I have an electric mixer. It might get used once a year because if I really need to mix something like making some whipped cream or something like that, I'll use this. And yes, I have used this for mashed potatoes. It's a little harder and takes longer than using an electric mixer, which is the only thing I use my electric mixer for. But this gets used for anything else that I would need to whip up, and it doesn't take any electricity. And so I love having this. So anyway, there's just a few ideas. I'm sure there's more things that I'm forgetting, but again, it's some of the things you might want to consider if you have electric appliances you're really dependent on or you really love. Also make sure that you have some sort of backup in case you don't have power to run those items. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Any other ideas you would like to share? What are your favorite appliances? Be they electric or non-electric, and do you have backups for your electric things? Please share with us down below. And any of the links I promise I'll be putting that will be the description box. So if you're new to Rumble or YouTube, just look down here below the video screen. You'll see the words either show more or more, and you click on that to open the description box. If you're on a smart device, it might look a little bit different. You might have to scroll down a little bit, maybe pass an ad or something, but just look for those words, and when you find them, click on that, open the description box. There you'll see the links. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.